Welcome to Real Talks with Pinks. Thank you for the love that we've been receiving in the past weeks. Thank you so much. Keep continuing to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We are very close to the 2K mark. So my beautiful face is done by a makeup artist called Havila. This is a full range. I used everything Havila. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram. I'm going to introduce my guest today. I'm very excited about this topic because a lot of people suggested this in the past and I never found a quite fitting guest to talk about it until today. So I'm going to ask my guest to introduce herself and then I'll introduce the topic of the day. Yes, ma'am, please introduce yourself.
Mpheng Thamae. I'm a counselling psychologist by profession and I am based in Lesotho. That's where I would want to end.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for coming. Today we are going to talk about childhood traumas. There's so many things that happen to our lives and we never know what to attribute this to. So I thought it befitting to invite our counseling psychologist to come and talk about the topic. So Mpheng, let's get straight into it. So what are early childhood traumas?
I must tell you that even as I was preparing this, one of my biggest issues, or just as a professional, is every time you go into a social media platform, you're like, how do I explain the topic in a way that doesn't undermine the clinical integrity?
Oh, okay.
But also, how do I people not feel like it's a lecture, right? So that's a conundrum I've been facing as I was preparing everything. I'm going to try and be in the middle because I think it's also important to bring the topic down to the people. So early childhood trauma is probably one of the most very broad. Thinking about doing it in this time that we have made me nervous, but we'll try and do what we can. Early childhood trauma is any event that disrupts a child's sense of safety.
Okay.
And overwhelms them to a point where their ability to cope is also disrupted. I could further explain it in Sesotho if I could, to say it's almost hobeha safety ngwana tlokotsing. It's an emotional response to an intense event that has happened in your life, and I think that's as simple as I would want to put it. It can happen emotionally, physically. A child could be exposed to that once, or it could be through a prolonged time. It could be perceived, it could be real.
Okay.
And yeah, if I could give examples it could be physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, effects of poverty, death, yes, separation from a loved one, death, but that intense emotional response, we could put it under the umbrella of an early childhood trauma if it happened early on in your life.
Oh, okay, okay. So tell me, what happens when this early childhood traumas are not dealt with? How do they manifest later on in life?
That's a very broad question. I think I would want to. There are many words that we use in our everyday, this woke generation. I think people are more informed, psychoeducated. So we use a lot of words. I'm going to try and answer and bring them to those words. There are many words that we use. A person, you have abandonment issues, or you have rejection issues, or however. So trauma has lifelong effects, especially if it's not addressed or resolved through therapy. And those words that I brought into play, abandonment, rejection, and they come from that they could stem from an early childhood trauma. I think a lot of times we use them, we're like, what do they mean, you know? A lot of times when someone says you have abandonment issues would look something like having this constant fear that people close to you are going to leave you. And issues of rejection is sort of a toned knowledge that you are not loved. It's mainly could be because we're talking about early childhood trauma. So it could stem mainly from our primary caregivers, which most times are our parents and our grandparents. There are also issues when we talked about the examples of trauma. Neglect could be some of those things where we either could suspect that a child has been deprived of their basic needs, and therefore that has effects either emotionally, psychologically, and so forth. So to answer your question, of course there are effects, especially if they're not resolved, especially if you don't deal with them.
I see. There's a quote that I saw. There's a page that I follow, a therapy page. So I once saw a quote that said, if you don't deal with your childhood traumas, your relationships will. And that struck me, because usually people close to you are the ones who know you, who see you. So usually, especially romantic relationships, your partner will be the one to suffer if they're not dealt with. With me in particular, before I went to therapy, my partner would say, you snap a lot. And I never thought this was an issue. Like where I come from, my family just knows, maybe you know, like I snap a lot, but I'm also quite emotional and I cry a lot. So as I discuss these things with my friends, as you say, we are the woke generation, so we discuss issues, we read, and one of them would be saying, I'm a perfectionist, and I'm like, what are you worried about? Like you want to do everything to the T. Some will say, no, I have this fear that my husband will leave me, my friends will leave me, or maybe I'm not too excellent, my boss thinks I'm this. So all these issues, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, you know better. We would think maybe they come or they stem from somewhere. What would you say about such?
I think this is also quite similar to the question that we just talked about now, the second question that we addressed. And I think it's very good that you're bringing up romantic relationships, because I feel every time we talk about romantic relationships, you have people's attention, you know, which always what people always want to talk about, because I think it's significant to people, and a lot of things happen there that people really see, like you're saying. This is how I would want to do it. I have this thing where we use in therapy, we say we should reframe things. So we're talking about trauma, and we're talking about early childhood trauma specifically, and we're talking about how it affects you later in life, right? In romantic relationships. So let's make an example. I want to bring it down because I'm trying not to make it into an academic thesis. So let's bring it down to make an example with what you said. There are people who are known to have strong personalities, you know, or use words like, no, you have a strong personality, or ulerofo, as your family would put it. And mostly, not all, mostly these things stem from early childhood traumas. They are what we call trauma responses. You are reacting to what happened earlier. I'll make an example. If in a relationship, let's say in Henu, maybe your dad was very punitive and was very strict and very... You knew, like, there are people who know, like, who would sense their fathers from the gate. They could search, oh, that's their tone. Is he happy? Is he not? You know, that sort of thing. And people learn that quite early. And even in relationships, because of learning and that emotional tone modeling, then they end up showing them in their relationships, you know. They would say, but you were angry at me when you did this. Maybe because it's similar to what the father did, right? And it's not necessarily necessarily the same, right? There'll be people who'll be like, oh no, I don't like conflict. It's one of the funniest things that I hear people say, I don't like conflict. I'm like, no one loves conflict, at least. Any decent human being doesn't like conflict. We have to do it. We have to resolve it because we're growing. But a lot of times people don't like resolving and confronting things because they've been peacemakers all their lives.
Yes.
All their lives, you've been the good child. You don't talk back or however. So even in life, you don't confront things in relationships, in friendships, because you don't like conflict, right? And so most of the time, these are things that could come from unresolved issues that you didn't even deal with. And you're like, oh, this is how I've chosen to live my life. You talked about perfectionism, fear of failing. There are people who come from families where everything didn't go well. Like they saw, my sister's not doing well, my brother chose criminal activity, I will make sure that I don't become this. And these are good defense mechanisms. They're not bad. They're good because they're helping you cope at that point until they become a bit detrimental to you in your relationships. So these are things that could happen that when we talk, when we sit down. For example, if you've been a competitive person all your life because your parents, you had to compete for love, with maybe there were 7 of you, and then your sister because they were quiet or smart. So people learn how to compete for love. Even in relationships, people do that. They compete for affection. They compete for love, And so it becomes, when there's a second person who says, like you said, your partner says, hey, I see this, then you need to confront it. So I would say that although I'm very fussy about what social media writes about psychology and everything, I would agree with that particular one, that if you don't deal with things now, they might and probably will catch up with you later.
Okay. So maybe as a round off, because when we're having a good conversation, time will be flying. How do I know I have these issues? If maybe I'm not aware, how do I know I have these issues? And how do I really deal with them? Because I think a lot of people usually say, oh no, I'm fine. Like I don't have issues. What are you talking about? So how does an individual really know? Because we usually, when you talk about trauma, things that have to do with psychology and such, people think you're supposed to be really depressed or suicidal for you to have issues. How do we know we have issues, and how do we know to confront them, and how do we do that?
Yeah. I think you're right. People usually say that they believe you have to be dying, especially in the Black culture. If we don't see blood or a wound or you sitting down or in a hospital, we don't believe you're sick, right? So what people need to understand is that you could be a well-adapted individual. That means you can go to work, you can do, basic functions, but it doesn't mean that you're okay. And you asked the right question. I think one of the first things that a person can do to identify this is one, if you're already watching this, then you're in the right place.
Okay.
At least it's sensitization, right? But it's gonna look like I'm a doctor who's saying medication is helpful. But even as a psychologist, and even personally for my life, I've seen that there are things we can't process by ourselves. That is why they're trained professionals, trained psychologists to help you through things. And I would really recommend that people go to therapy, depending on what you want to know and how dedicated you are to it. I really think there's no way you can say, okay, I see this trauma, even just talking now, when you talk with someone, you process things better. You see, oh, is that it? Is that what's happening? So I would recommend therapy above everything else.
And therapy is not it's like a trained professional.
People choose different kinds of therapy, to be honest. I really don't even want to get into that particularly. Muchemu would say, no, there's a trusted youth leader at church, or I trust someone, or however. It's just that everyone will be able to deal with it with their expertise. So I don't expect that someone who's not trained will be able to see particular psychological issues because they're not trained psychologically. But a strong support system at church, even that, because I don't believe you can just go to a psychologist and that's it. A strong support system for people that even can't afford it, speaking out, talking with friends, those are steps that could help you to at least come close to healing or evolving from the trauma.
Oh, wow. I don't know if you have any other last words before we close it off, but my takeaway when I talk to psychologists is always I want to deal with my issues so that I don't bleed on people.
Oh, that's a very nice way of putting it. I think in the last thought I would want to say, it will be just about mental health, I think, especially in this country, that I know that we're a people. I heard someone the other day complain that the robots are too many. And I was like, why can't we just be grateful they're here? And I didn't get that. So I would like to end on a positive note to say, I personally, as a trained psychologist and Mosotho girl, I'm very impressed at where we're going in terms of mental health in the country. There are more and more trained people coming. And so I'm very excited about what the future is going to look like. I think Basotho's mental health is safe and is going to even be more safe in the future. So that's where I would want to end.
Thank you so much, Mpheng, for coming. We're doing episode 2 and I'm really excited about this. This has been a really useful conversation. So I'll end off by saying, let's deal with our issues so that we don't bleed on others. Thank you so much for watching. Please share, like, and comment on the video. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.